Excellent. Thanks, everybody, for sticking around. I think a really good place to start is with Yusha, and I think you can maybe help everybody out by talking a little bit about what is Local Bushel? Where does this idea come from?
Okay, sure. Basics.
Softball to start.
I'm founder of Local Bushel, and it's a marketplace. It's an online farmers market for wholesale, mainly chefs. We love working with restaurants, and our goal is to get you stuff from local farms, harvested to order, at farmers market quality, but as convenient or more convenient as a commercial distributor, and accessible, which really means cost effective and not more expensive than getting commercially sourced food. So the mission is really to make local food in small to medium-sized farms much more mainstream and like the bulk of what we look at as food distribution.
So what does that actually look like? What's sort of the back end?
Yeah, we do logistics, and we have an ordering platform. So we have a mobile ordering platform for chefs, and then we translate that into an order for the farmer, and we're actually, our team, making sure that that order gets to the chef on time. It's our drivers, and we're picking up product from the farmer and using our technology to manage a very fragmented supply chain that has product across a lot of small to medium-sized farmers. So the logistics is actually probably our secret sauce. The ordering platform is super cool and easy to use on mobile, but how we figure out getting small to medium-sized farmers to work with us at a very high level of reliability, that's what we're good at.
And where did this idea come from?
From chefs, really, and farmers. I was trailing chefs and just learning about food distribution because agriculture, I mean, you're all food buyers here, and the food that gets produced, like that sector of the economy actually has a bigger impact on climate change than even transportation. So if you're able to change agriculture, you're gonna have a bigger impact than Tesla. So focusing on sustainable food, it's a fast-growing segment of a big market, which is a good place to be in if you're a small company. The thing was to try to figure out how to make it easier for chefs to get access to local food. There's no education involved. Like, everyone already wants it. You go to the farmer's market 2 hours earlier than your shift starts in order to like buy a bunch of stuff at retail prices and then drag it, really, wheelbarrow, taxi, subway, whatever it is, back to the restaurant. And so my challenge is really, how can we get you the same quality product with the same transparency and do it in a way that is gonna have unit economics that allow us to deliver a price that's comparable to the commercial distributor.
Okay, great. Let's come back to the sustainability question.
Sure.
But Steve, I wanna ask you, you're a longtime tech entrepreneur. Where did your interest in food come from? When did that emerge?
Well, first of all, it's great to be back here, and congratulations on having a second year. A lot of these things start but don't necessarily scale, so that's one of the reasons I wanted to come back and really celebrate connecting the dots in terms of the tech on the table and having more of a discussion, more of a collaboration. I'm great to hear Yusha's story. I should have established right up front, I am not a Fulbright scholar. I barely graduated from college. In terms of your question, I started making some investments about 10 years ago, kind of smallish personal investments and some things, particularly in the DC area, like Sweet Green and some other things. And then it really expanded in the last 3-4 years. And at Revolution, we have both a venture group and a growth group. And we've been the last 3 years, we've invested well over $100 million in food-related things. Sweet Green expansion rounds, Revolution Foods, which started in school lunches, now has launched a consumer product line in 4,000 supermarkets. Kava, which is another fast casual concept growing around the country. Order Up, which was a kind of a platform that then was acquired by Groupon. So it started as sort of small and then grew over time. The reason is we realized that there really was going to be a revolution in food, as we've been hearing about all day, and as you've written about, there's a little bit of a war on big food, which I think is a good thing. Challenging some of these kind of long-established traditional brands that we might have grown up with, but aren't necessarily what we want for ourselves or for our kids. And pushing for healthier options is I think, important. And when you start with a $5 trillion industry, there's a lot of room for growth. When you start with an industry that has TAM, total addressable market, of 100%, because everybody eats, and I'm told in this country it's not 3 times a day, it's 4.7 times a day. We eat a little extra here. It just suggests there's a lot of opportunity for the production, including on the ag side, distribution and consumption at home and offices and schools and on the move, and a whole new series of companies and brands are going to be built on that. And we just wanted to help in the way we can, and also invest in the companies that we think have that kind of breakout potential.
So is food your main area of investment? Is that your focus?
No, we've got several dozen investments in different sectors, some more traditional internet businesses, marketplaces, one that's based actually in New York called Handy that is an example. We recently invested in Sport Radar, a sports analytics company, DraftKings as well. So there's a variety of different businesses, but we do think food is one of the core sectors that is ripe for disruption, and I think there's some huge brands that are going to be built. As an example, I mentioned Revolution Foods just launching a consumer products line, Lunchables, which is a brand, if you have kids, you probably are familiar with. It's a $1 billion business, and I would argue it's kind of junk food, and there probably is an opportunity to create a healthier version of Lunchables, and that alone, that one product, is $1 billion brand. So it's clear to me that you're going to see some real breakout successes all really across the landscape.
So how does food fit into your notion of the third wave? How are you seeing this play out so far?
Well, I heard a little bit in the beginning. The core thesis is the first wave was just getting everybody connected, which of course now we take for granted, but we started AOL in 1985, so 31 years ago. Only 3% of people were connected, and those 3% were connected 1 hour a week. And it took really a decade before everybody got connected. That was the first way, just getting the world to understand why they should get connected, building the on-ramps, and going from a business that nobody knew about or cared about to something that people couldn't live without. The last 15 years really has been this app economy. Software, whether it be Google or Facebook or Twitter or Waze or Snapchat or what have you. Small engineering teams usually, viral apps usually, and that obviously huge successes, and some of those will continue. But my belief is that in this third wave, it really is going to take the internet to the next level and disrupt some pretty big sectors, and also change in pretty fundamental ways some of the most important aspects of our lives. And obviously, food and eating is one of them, but also healthcare. How do we stay healthy, and how do our kids learn in more personalized, adaptive kind of ways, and how do we move around in smarter cities, and how do we figure out ways to kind of be smarter about use of energy. These pretty fundamental parts of everyday life that have changed somewhat in the first wave and the second wave, but are going to change a lot more in the third wave. And food, for the reason I mentioned, is a perfect example of that.
So I want to ask both of you this, but Yusha, I'm going to start with you. What do you view as the biggest problem with our food system, and is there a solution that comes from technology?
Oh gosh, what's the biggest problem in food today? I think
I can only a couple. I won't limit you to one.
I think I can give a biased answer from our perspective in food distribution. I think that sales channels are the hardest thing. A lot of the farmers we work with, they have hundreds of acres. Like, they might be a 600-acre farm, but only growing products on 100 acres because they don't have any sales channels for the rest of it. So they might cobble it together through running maybe a dozen farmers markets a week, which is a lot of staff and a lot of overhead. They might sell some of their stuff at a produce auction. They might form a bilateral relationship with a spaghetti sauce company and move their tomatoes that way. But it's really haphazard, and they're forced to do their own distribution and their own sales, which means that as a small farmer, it's hard to get to scale in those functions because you don't have enough volume to sell. So I think that's why historically distributors and brokers and auctions and all of these middlemen exist. So I think that eliminating the friction around the sales channel so that you can meet supply and demand, that's the problem we're trying to solve. And I think there's a bunch of inefficiency there that comes from a offline, opaque, fragmented industry that structurally is the type of industry where an online marketplace can bring a lot of benefits.
Steve, how about you?
Well, I'd say at a kind of 40,000-foot level, I think we eat the wrong things and too much of it, which is leading to a whole series of issues, including obesity and diabetes. 1/6 of our economy is healthcare, and it really is a sick care system, and some of those things are are resulting from choices we all make in terms of what we eat. In some ways, healthcare kind of begins at the end of the fork. So we've seen an evolution. 200 years ago, 90% of us worked on farms. Now it's 2%. And we've seen an evolution, particularly in the last century, particularly the last half century, to more consolidation, more industrialized approaches to food, as you've written about. And now we're seeing the emergence, in part enabled by technology and new companies, Sweetgreen and others, that are trying to kind of move in a different direction that is allowing farmers to have a more successful business model and have a better sense of the market and pricing and better ways to manage the logistics. And there's no single thing that sort of we magically do and it's going to change that. But our hope is a revolution in food will result in consumers having more options and increasingly healthy options, increasingly convenient options, increasingly affordable options that over time will improve the food systems, which also will end up having impact on the healthcare system. And one of the reasons we invested in this company, Revolution Foods, initially started about 10 years ago, focusing on schools, is there's a clear connection between what kids eat and learning outcomes. I mean, so how to, as well as essentially teaching them habits that in many cases they will have for the rest of their lives, and trying to give them healthier options that improve their learning and really enhance and extend their lives. Pretty fundamental stuff. And so we do view it as different companies, different brands, different entrepreneurs doing different things. But we also kind of take it up a level and say this Revolution Foods a much bigger and much more important thing than I think most people realize.
So is there a place in food where technology does not have a role? And you've written a little bit about this, the different kinds of technology in food, and I'd love to get your thoughts on that. Should technology always be there?
No, I don't think so. Obviously, I'm a fan of technology and a fan of innovation and trying new things, and a fan of any entrepreneur anywhere doing anything. So in that sense, I cast a pretty broad net and want to encourage and celebrate anybody doing things. But I do think, and I heard it in one of the earlier sessions, that my preference is to focus on how technology can enhance what's happening, enhance the experience, and I personally prefer investing in things, whether it be Sweetgreen or Kava or some of the other things I mentioned, where they really are trying to create healthier but real food options. And I did write a column a year or so ago about Soylent, and it wasn't so much about the product. I personally thought it tasted like vanilla pancake mix and didn't find it particularly appetizing, but more how they were marketing it, which is basically saying, you're so busy. I'm sorry, I'm offending somebody who's a big Soylent fan, or maybe
Actually,
the
that's
Soylent
the
CEO here.
Here has tried Soylent.
They're fans, but the basic marketing of it was you're so busy coding you don't have time to eat, and so you should do Soylent instead. I think that's not the right way to go. So if you want to view it as something that occasionally you'll have, and fine. But if you want to market it to parts of the world which have huge kind of hunger problems, terrific. But I think trying to use technology to connect people, it's always been what's interesting to me. Even those early days of internet, we said the killer app of the internet was people. It was community. We now think of it as social media. So how do you use it to bring people together and give them, as I said before, kind of better options? So ways to enhance the restaurant experience, for example, makes sense. Sweetgreen, I haven't seen the data recently, but I think about 30% of their orders now are on people's phones. And when you walk in, it's ready for you. You don't have to wait in line. You don't have to wait to pay. It's a more convenient way to give people healthier options. They use technology to manage some of the relationships with the local farmer networks they try to build. So that enhances the experience. There are others who are trying things, and it'll be interesting to see how they play out. They essentially use technology to replace people, so that you can order remotely and kind of pick up your food without having to see anybody, and that might work. And there's certainly, as labor cost moves up, and I do think a $15 an hour minimum wage is going to happen, then you have to be thoughtful about kind of managing the labor cost of things. But I'm not sure you necessarily have to go so far as to create almost like, so most of you won't remember this, but in New York, when I was a kid, there was an automat system where you kind of walked in and could get food without having to see people. That's, for me, is not the best way to use technology. So how do you get better options to more people in more places with more convenience and more affordability. And it's the other problem that I think a number of companies are working on, it ties in with logistics, is food waste. A third of the food is thrown away, which is bad in all kinds of ways. So how can you be smarter about that as well?
So Yusha, have you seen an impact then in food waste from what you're doing? Do you have real metrics that are able to track that? Because I think being able to see the difference that you're making here, we can talk about technology all we want, but until you can actually see the impact, I think that's a huge difference.
So the interesting thing about farmers making decisions to sell or not sell a product is that a lot of it's tied to the price they know they're going to be able to get in the market for it. So a product in like a commodity marketplace is commercially graded. So if your product's like an ugly product, which is like ugly produce is now a thing that's starting to gain real traction, you're not going to get a great price for it. And let's say you're in peak zucchini season, everyone has zucchini, everyone has too much of it because the weather got warm unexpectedly, and you have off-grade zucchini, like a number 2 ugly zucchini. You're going to sell your 20-pound box at auction for like $3, like nothing. You won't even make back the cost of labor of getting it out of the field. So there are cases where for the farmer, they actually choose to not harvest it because the cost of labor exceeds the price they'll be able to get on the market. We try to change that. We have an ugly program where we'll buy seconds at a fixed price.
That's a great name. Is it called the Ugly Program?
Yeah, actually, we name everything ugly dash carrot or rainbow carrot, whatever it is. And partly because everything's alphabetical, it always shows up on the bottom, so it's handy. You can get them all at once if you're into that. And it's great for chefs because if you're using it for a sauce or if you're using it for like something where it's going to be chopped up, it's a great value. And that's actually how we've been able to, over time, we've been around for 2 years. This year, we're really starting to expand into like larger accounts, fast casual, like Sweetgreen, Maple, or HelloFresh. And that's a good avenue for large volumes of extra product, and we can move it on demand. So our model is all harvest to order, so we can get you orders that we can sell immediately within 24 hours of you getting it out of the field.
Would you consider doing direct to consumer?
Well, what do you think? I think that you've had a lot of experience seeing both models. What do you think about the merits of B2B versus B2C?
Well, I think what you're doing makes sense, to build up the platform and build up the supply chain and build the customers and having larger enterprise customers, if you will, I think is a way to build the scale. But I wouldn't be shocked if 5 or 10 years from now you added sort of a direct consumer. I mean, it's tough and logistically more challenging. Obviously, a lot of people have tried it, some more successful than others, and a lot of capital is going into a variety of different delivery-related options. And I think there will be, as there always is, a shakeout there. So probably focusing on what you're doing for a while, letting the dust settle a little bit. But I wouldn't be surprised if that wasn't something you did down the road.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think.
But I didn't have the Fulbright, so what do I know?
Yeah, I mean, should be asking you.
Can we maybe stop bringing that up in this session?
Every question will know.
Exactly.
So one of the things I've written a bit about is how consumers have embraced technology in so many parts of their life, but there seems to be a little bit of a rejection around technology and food and a move away from that. And I'm curious if either of you have seen that and how you think that is going to shake out. How is that eventually going to land?
Well, this is a little tough for me to answer because we don't work with consumers.
I guess farmers.
But I can talk about how our chefs and wholesale buyers and farmers deal with it. We try to take a very thoughtful approach to technology, so we aren't just building to get to like the bleeding edge of everything. So one example is for our farmers, we decided not to build them a mobile app, at least not now. We have one for our chefs because in the kitchen, the phone is really the best tool they have. But for our farmers, our system actually spits out things they can print, because what they need to do is when they're out in the field, they need something like roll up and stick in their pocket and like hand to other farm workers, and paper works best. The same thing on the mobile platform. We can do beautiful staged photos of things, but what we found is that with chefs who are educated buyers who care about exactly what they're getting, accuracy is more important than beauty. So we take pictures of the product as we're picking it up from the farmer so that it's exactly what they're going to get. And it's not the most staged photo. We didn't bring it into the office for a photo shoot, but it's real time. And it's more like a farmer's market. You're actually picking out the product.
Yeah, I'd say it's situational. I think there are times where people obviously see the benefit of using technology to be able to do things they couldn't do, or do it faster, do it more conveniently, including in the food space. But there are also times where people just want to put the technology aside for a moment and like have a conversation, have a meal, and have a bottle of wine. Sort of the whole, what the original concept of restaurants, which kind of got lost a little bit, and the slow food movement helped kind of build more momentum. I think you're seeing a lot of people who are chefs and running restaurants. How do you create an even more engaging kind of experience? And that's probably as much around the social side as it is the technology side. At the same time, there are times where time is limited and you want to pick up something quickly, and technology is a way to kind of expedite that whole process. And so I think it kind of depends on what your objective is at that particular point in time. There are times where technology will allow you to do things you couldn't do, and there are times where maybe setting aside for a little while and talking to somebody is a good thing too.
So do you think that technology has infiltrated the food sector at the same pace as other sectors, or?
No, I think it's been slower. Now I'd say on the restaurant side, I'd say no. In terms of some of the larger companies, and fast food companies historically have been much more aggressive users of technology. McDonald's, for example, 25 years ago was doing some things, and maybe if they innovated less on the technology and more on the food, they would be better positioned. And they're starting to do some of that, and so it kind of depends on. And I would say in some of the industrialized kind of large food conglomerates probably are focused too much on systems and too much on technology and too much on processing and too much on cost reduction and so forth. And that's partly why we have a problem, but that also for entrepreneurs creates the opportunity.
So Yusha, for you, have you sort of shifted or pivoted or changed your business as you've progressed based on some of these, you mentioned before how you take pictures because that's exact at that moment because that's what your chefs want.
Right.
Any other learnings or shifts like that?
I think that we did a surprisingly consistent model the whole way through. We've been around for 2 years. When we started, it was me as the only full-time employee and a part-time driver who actually quit 4 weeks in, and so I was driving the truck for a little bit. And it was, even at that point, an online marketplace with farmers. You choose what farm you want the product from, and then we get it to you. One drop, we take responsibility for it being right and being on time. I think we've gotten better at these things. Like now, head of operations is not like me trying to back into a loading dock. It's like our head of operations came from Amazon, was running Prime Now in New York before joining Local Bushel. So now we track things like operations fill rate, and we're very happy that we're able to hit 98%. So 98% of our line items reach the customer with no issues within their delivery window, no quality, and accurate. And I think that when you look at what chefs want, I think the market's only going to get more and more competitive over time. When we started, it was really like local food. It was really, you have to go to the farmer's market. The chefs just have to find a way to drag it back, and they have to pay a lot more. I think that what we're hoping to do is be part of an overall movement to put pressure on the food system to push pricing down without taking a cut from the farmer and just taking it out of inefficiencies in the middle. So I think the to-be-answered question for us is, can we stick with our harvest-to-order model where we don't have any warehouses and be able to match in the future on like same-day delivery, and we're on our way to launching next-day delivery, and use technology to be very smart about our forecasting so that we don't get into this model that the commercial distributors do where they have giant 2 million square foot warehouses and the kale is sitting there for 2 weeks because it has a 2-week shelf life.
So that's what you see as one of the inefficiencies there. Are there others that you're trying to remove from the system?
Well, I think that the warehouse is actually huge because it's not just the fact that you have to pay for a warehouse and rent and cooling to keep that at 40 degrees or whatever temperature your product should be at. There's also a lot of labor involved. There's a commercial distributor in New York that's about our size in terms of number of trucks, which means they have probably a similar number of customers. We have 2 part-time warehouse people who are just packing trucks, and they have over 20 people working in their warehouse. Overall, it ends up being probably 15% of revenue to work the warehouse model, because you have to incorporate waste as well. And for us, it's maybe 0.5% of our revenue. So that's a fundamentally different cost structure. I think that's probably the biggest difference, and how that the other inefficiency that is kind of inherent in the warehouse model is that you can't, you're part of this like globalized supply chain with long lead times, a lot of safety stock. And so there's a lot of middlemen and brokers involved, and the product's old. Like chicken, actually, when it leaves the processor, they stamp it with a date and it goes to the grocery store, and that tray pack, that date is 3 weeks from the date the chicken got processed. So when you bring chicken home and it's only good for a couple days,
right.
that chicken was 2 weeks old when you got it.
Okay, that's scary. Steve, you talked about this a little bit before, but I think it would be really helpful if you could really lay it out there. What do you look to invest in? What's really your thesis when it comes to food? And is there something out there? Is there some idea that you really want to invest in where you haven't been able to find something that fits?
Yeah, we've looked at a lot of areas that we have not invested yet, but that we will still look. Some earlier stage, some later. And I also should say, obviously, there are a lot of great things happening in New York, a lot of great things in San Francisco and so forth. We also believe there are a lot of things happening all over the country and that don't get as much attention. So we launched this Rise of the Rest initiative. And even next week, I'm on a bus going from Omaha to Lincoln to Denver to Salt Lake to Albuquerque to Phoenix, and visited a couple dozen cities in the last couple of years. And what's happening in all these third wave sectors, but also in food, is remarkable innovation in these different places. And if you look at the history of these things, even recently, relatively recently, like Chipotle really just started like a burrito shop in Denver. And Panera was in St. Louis, Sweetgreen was in DC. One of the things I love about it's a real low-tech, almost throwback kind of thing, but one of the things that's really unleashed tremendous innovation, entrepreneurship, and lowered the bar, given more people opportunity to be entrepreneurs, are food trucks, which create a very easy, inexpensive way to kind of, if you had an idea, to get on the field. And some of those food trucks then open restaurants, and some of those restaurants now have expanded. And my guess is some of those are going to end up being the next generation Chipotle or what have you. And while some of them will be in the big cities, my big bet is most of them will be spread all around the country. So understanding what some of those concepts are and watching them emerge, it makes sense. We do these pitch competitions in every city, and there's always some food kind of startups that are part of that that pitch. So I think it's happening. People just feel like it's an opportunity, feel like it's sort of like a jump ball, and nobody knows exactly what's going to happen in the next 10, 20 years in the food industry, but it feels ripe for disruption. There's lots of opportunities. So then it just depends on different entrepreneurs. What do they want to do? They want to figure out a way to do some new food concept. Do they want to focus on some of the distribution, logistics side? I think a lot of the innovation in ag tech, agriculture technology, it's going to be places like Louisville and St. Louis. Monsanto's in St. Louis, and some people like Monsanto, some people don't. All I know is there's thousands of engineers who do understand farming, some of whom are going to go into startups, and I'll bet you 10 years from now, there's an ag tech startup circle in the St. Louis area. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens in each of these sectors, but it's also going to be interesting to see what happens in different places, and also particularly in food, maybe more than other sectors. I'm optimistic that we will see a more inclusive approach to entrepreneurship. It's, last year 78% of venture capital went to California, New York, and Massachusetts. So if you're in the other 47 places, states, you're disadvantaged. Over 90% went to men, less than 10% to women. About 1% went to African Americans, about 1% went to Hispanics. I think in some of these new sectors, you're seeing great innovators in other places that are, with different kinds of backgrounds, and I'll bet you that's some of the great innovators in this third wave.
So we're going to open it up to questions in a minute, but first we're going to end with a speed round. Just very quickly, what is the biggest trend or shift that you're tracking right now, Steve?
I think it relates to what I just said, the regionalization of entrepreneurship that will not just relate to food, but that's going to be a place to watch the innovation here, and which doesn't mean there aren't going to be great things in New York or San Francisco or Boston or other kind of places, but I think people are going to be surprised by how innovation is more broadly dispersed across the economy. The second thing would be the importance of partnerships. In most of these third wave sectors, you can't really go it alone. You need partners.
Yusha, how about you?
I'm interested in how chefs are changing their ordering behavior and how they're willing to use technology to make it save them time and give them more information back.
Great. Okay. Any questions?
I will say one other thing
Please.
before you get a question. The other thing to focus on, I think that doesn't get enough attention, is policy and regulations, which is scares people and slows people down. But it's critical in the food industry. Chipotle is a great example of this, where basically we've got significant losses in terms of customers, revenues and market value, basically over food safety issues. So as you think about this, it's not just about the technology.
Right.
There's a lot of other aspects that need to be taken into consideration.
Great. Any questions? Right back there.
Hi, I'm Brett. I'm the COO of Lucky Peach, which is a food media company. And Steve, I'm curious, in this third wave of the internet, the way that people are consuming content, is the business of it and the way people are doing it is totally in flux right now. And I'm curious where you see media in the third wave.
Well, I think media, to a large extent, got disrupted a little bit in the first wave and a lot in the second wave, and so I think it will be incremental in the third wave. I think the media is still, particularly some of the larger media companies, are still trying to adjust to the new reality. But I think that's been a huge, communications, media, financial services were some of the sectors that really got disrupted in the second wave. So exactly what more happened in the third wave, you probably have a better sense of it if that's what you're working on. Clearly, it's more distributed, more social, more mobile. Those trends have already built up a lot of momentum. I think will continue, and then they'll start infiltrating some of these other sectors, whether it be food or healthcare or education, things like that.
Right up here.
Hi, Pam Dillon, Wine Ring, AI for the wine industry. My question for Steve, can you talk a little bit about how the capital markets are responding to the third wave builds, requiring navigating through the various infrastructures that are set up there, whether it be regulation or whether it be very deep builds with artificial intelligence, machine learning? These are longer builds, these are deeper builds, these are more interdisciplinary. Are the capital markets aware of this and responsive?
Well, first of all, as you mentioned the wine business, I should have said earlier that I actually am a farmer, because we have a winery in Virginia. There's now 280 wineries in Virginia, and Thomas Jefferson brought wine to America, and we're trying to make sure that Virginia is known for its place. So we have a little experience in agriculture and farming, although not a whole lot. In terms of the core question around third wave, I think capital markets are beginning to adjust to it. I think they're beginning to recognize that some of these sectors are ripe for disruption. They're a little worried about some of the incumbents. What might happen? Can they protect their positions, or what are the new kind of disruptive upstarts that emerge? And you're seeing more capital flow. When we first invested in Sweetgreen, and it's not that long ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and from an institutional standpoint as opposed to a personal standpoint, a lot of people say, "What are you doing investing in like a salad thing? What does that have to do with the internet and technology?" But we've gotten more calls where people want to co-invest in Sweetgreen than probably any other investment we've made in the last few years, because there is a recognition that there's some kind of big businesses being built, and of course, Danny here with Shake Shack is kind of as a recent example, like a little burger shack in the park, and then suddenly it's worth $1 billion, and maybe I should do some of that. And so as people see some successes, you start seeing more and more capital moving into these sectors. But there's also recognition that there's hard problems, and some of these revolutions will happen in more evolutionary ways. The partnership thing is important, and so when they're looking to make investments, how are they figuring that out? As I said, the policy aspects more significant, which scares people a little bit, but they kind of recognize it, kind of goes with the territory with some of these third wave sectors, including food. So it's changing, and there's even some venture funds focused exclusively on food that wouldn't have existed a decade ago. I think it will just accelerate over the next decade.
Any other questions? Oh yeah, thanks.
Yusha, does the Bayer-Monsanto merger scare you or give you hope for what you have to do?
Gosh, what a loaded question about GMOs and seed companies. So Monsanto's a GMO seed company. Bayer, I think, is also one of the biggest agricultural seed companies in the world. So they're thinking about merging, I think just because their industry has been under some pressure recently. How it affects farmers, I think we don't make any sort of prescriptions to farmers about how you should farm. So not all of our farms are certified organic. Some of them use GMO seeds, and all we do is we disclose what they're doing, and it's up to the buyer what they want to buy. And I think that consolidation of an industry that is a required input for a farm is always a little dangerous, because the farmer is in a very difficult business. It's a lot of capital costs. You have to put out those capital costs before you produce anything and get paid for it, most times. And then in between, all sorts of stuff can happen, whether the soil's acting up, the plants aren't growing, your animals got sick. And so anything that increases their fixed costs, I think, is a negative. But I think it's to be seen, A, whether that'll happen, and B, if it will increase costs.
And the only thing I'd add is it seems like primarily a tech play. It's really a big data play. I think there's a perception that, probably a reality, that the data is going to more and more inform farmers in helpful ways in terms of helping give them a sense of what they should be growing and how things, weather and other things are going to impact them. They've been a little bit flying blind. And so this could be helpful in that respect. The other thing, if the merger does happen, I would accelerate the timeline for the ag tech startup scene in St. Louis, because not all the people working at Monsanto will choose to work at. I have some experience with these large mergers, and they're not always easy.
Any other questions? I don't see any. Okay, so Steve, any advice for Yusha?
Well, I'm still learning about the company, so I'm always skeptical, always reluctant to provide too much advice when you don't know what you're talking about. But I think staying focused on the enterprise side, I think, makes sense. Really nailing a few regions so that you really have critical mass there, and then from there you can expand into other areas. Often companies have grand aspirations, which are great, but don't execute in their core markets well enough to really demonstrate it works, and then from there go on. Even Facebook started really small in one school, and a few schools, and a few more schools, and then became this global platform. But if they had tried to go too big too fast, I think they would have failed. It's much easier to boil a bathtub than boil the ocean. So I think focus matters, and execution matters, and satisfied customers who want to do more with you matters. So it's really kind of the basics of trying to figure out how to execute. And one of the quotes I love, America's greatest inventors, Thomas Edison, over a century ago, said, "Vision without execution is hallucination." So having a big idea, having a big vision, it's important. But executing against that with the right team, the right priorities, and the right relationship with customers, the right partners, things like that, is really where the rubber meets the road. So congratulations on the launch. And it sounds like in the first couple of years there's good momentum, clearly solving a problem that needs to be solved. And hopefully it's just scratching the surface in terms of what's possible. And that's true for others in this room who are brave enough to be entrepreneurs. All I can say as a final note is when we started AOL, it really was a decade before my parents knew what I was doing. They didn't understand it. They're quite sure it was going to not work. And several times they'd call me and say, "Steve, we know you're really passionate about this, but it doesn't seem to be working. Do you have a plan B or something?" no, Mom, I think it will work. And, and eventually it did. I used to say it was a 10-year in the making overnight success. So as you're focusing on your businesses, I got to take that long view. You got to believe in what you're doing, and that's how you change the world.
Great. That's a great note to end on. So thank you.
Thank you.